as I told you, Tom Dean is with us today. You probably remember him being here about 2 years ago, around about this time, and so we are pleased to have him come and speak. And I think I told you this 2 years ago, but I'll tell you again because sometimes we get forgetful. Tom is Director of Disaster Response, working with North Carolina Baptist Home Mission, and also Director of the Cuban Partnership. And I remember going to Caraway when he was there, and I think he had a little bit of hair then. But I do remember he taught me the song that I torture y'all with, "We Are One in the Spirit." But Tom, come on and share with us.
Yeah, not often do I get introduced that somebody knew me when I had hair. How about that? Wow. Yeah, I used to have hair, but then I've worked with Baptists for 40 years. So, yeah, don't tell Baptist leaders that I said that. How about that? Yeah, I know. It was 2.5 years ago. I was standing in the middle of a home that was destroyed. And I want to paint a picture for you. There was nothing left. The walls were crumbling down. There was no roof. The beds were gone. The only thing left was metal. It was a house in Maui that had been devastated by the fires. And we had volunteers there who were doing their best to help people find just a little bit of something to say that they could salvage something from their home that was completely destroyed. And on this particular day, we were meeting with a lady who had lived in this house as a child, had come back to take care of her sick mother, had witnessed the death of her mother a few years before, and was living in the home trying the best she could to live an okay, good life. It was our understanding that she was not a Christian, or if she was, she really didn't care about the Lord at that moment, because she had nothing left from her home that she had grown up in. But our group of volunteers from North Carolina were there, and we were doing our best to try to bring her comfort as we covered in our Tyvek suits, the hoods over our heads, the goggles, and the mask. It looked like we were in some kind of germ-infested medical drama TV kind of thing. That's how we looked. And so we would take a shovel of ash and we would put it in a screen, and then we would sift out. And sometimes we would find a nickel, sometimes we would find a quarter, sometimes we would find a ring, sometimes we would find a little piece of an earring. But what we were looking for that day was her mother's wedding band that was on a gold chain, hanging from a gold chain. And when we get there, she tells us, "I think my bedroom is right there, and I think my nightstand was right there," but the only reason she thought that was because the bed springs were what was in that room, all burnt up, and all just everything else around it just ash. And so that's where we started shoveling ash. We worked for hours and hours, and we didn't find that. We found clumps of coins that the fire was so hot that it was melted together. We found her safe. Well, it was more like a firebox. And when we opened up the firebox, she had some $2 bills that she had kept in her firebox, but they were ash. It was so hot that it just turned that paper money into just little fragments of paper. She was distraught. She was sad. She was angry. And she had nowhere to go. But as that day went on and we kept talking to her and just asking her questions about her family, it seemed like the load got a little bit lighter. We talked about why we were there, why we weren't charging anything, because that's not what we do, and all those kinds of things. And by the end of the day, we had only found a few little things, but had not found that ring. And so we started back the next day. And we were shoveling, but she seemed a little heavier than the day before. So we're shoveling and we're sifting. And so she just sat down on a 5-gallon bucket, and she is just distraught. And, you know, I'm not the best at comforting a woman in her 50s that had lost everything. That's just not who I am. And I had other women on our team, but because I was the ordained minister, you know, I was the one that was the best one to talk to her, according to my other team members, not according to me. But I sat down on the bucket with her while our volunteers are over there sifting. And she just starts talking almost out of her mind to her mother. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry that I let our home burn up. I'm sorry that I'm sorry that And she was internalizing all these things that had happened to her as she was the reason for that. You know, shock and sadness and the loss of lots of things cause us to think things that are not really true. And I don't really remember what I said to her. I know that later on at supper, when we were back at our lodging, one of my volunteers said, Tom, you were just so comforting to her. I don't remember. What I do remember is that when she said these words, Mom, I'm so sorry that this was your last resting place. And see, the day before she had said that her mom had died a few years before. Well, not only were we sifting through the ash of her home, we were also sifting her mother's ashes, which was also on the bedside table. I think that's why the wedding ring became so important. And so it became a whole different place. It almost felt holy. And I don't remember what I said. But what I do remember, and by the way, we never found the ring. We found the necklace that it was hanging on. It was still clasped. The only thing we can think is that the fire was so hot, it just melted the ring away. But it didn't melt the necklace away. But that seemed to bring her a little bit of hope and joy. We had finished. She said, I don't want to look for anything else. There's nothing else. So by the end of the day, we were saying our goodbyes. She cried and hugged and just seemed a little bit lighter. Now, why do I tell you that story? That brings us right into our passage of Scripture today, Isaiah 43:2. And Isaiah 43:2 says this: When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And the rivers will not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be scorched, and the flame will not burn you. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. So when you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and that will help you understand that when you pass through the fire, or you pass through the storm, because the Lord is with us, things are going to be better. In 2024, North Carolina experienced the worst natural disaster ever to come into our state, Hurricane Helene. I know you've heard about it because you were on the edge of those trees coming down. from here all the way through the western North Carolina mountains. It was just the far counties going toward Murphy that had about the same damage as here. So that big of space, 28, 30 counties, something like that, experienced damage from Hurricane Helene. But that year in particular, North Carolina Baptist volunteers had already deployed to 15 other disasters. Unprecedented number of disasters that our volunteers had deployed in 2024. And then the Lord, for some reason, saw fit to end that year with the greatest natural disaster. Now, I did not say the Lord caused it. Just please bear with me. I don't want you to think that I'm going somewhere that you don't want me to go. I promise you'll see. The largest natural disaster ever hit our state. $6 billion worth of damage. Billion. No, 60 billion, excuse me. $60 billion worth of damage. The greatest ever. Up until that point, Hurricane Florence, 8 years ago, was our greatest natural disaster. And before that, you have to go back to 1999 to Hurricane Floyd. That was the largest natural disaster. And before that, you have to go all the way back to the 80s, the late 80s, when Hurricane Hugo came right up through here. So North Carolina has experienced its share of storms and difficulty. But our volunteers started at the beginning of August with a tropical storm that came up through Lumberton, and we were working on cleaning out flooded homes from that tropical storm. And 1 week after we finished that, we turned around and went back to Southport and Leland, and we're dealing with flooding down there from a tropical storm. And we had volunteers that were finishing up their work in Southport who moved on their way up to western North Carolina in anticipation that we were going to have to do a little bit of work. Because you know, that storm was not supposed to do the kind of damage in North Carolina that it did. Everybody's eyes were focused on Florida. It's going to rip Florida apart. And that eye of that storm shifted just 100 miles over Tennessee. And when the storm shifted to come up over Tennessee, that put North Carolina mountains on the dirty side. There is a dirty side of a hurricane. If you've never heard that, look it up. It's usually the top right-hand quadrant of that circle is the dirty side of the storm. And so all of a sudden, that rain came, and as you know, I'm not telling you anything you've not heard, it ripped out sewer lines and water lines and electrical lines and power lines and communication lines and infrastructure in cities and towns, the smallest to the largest. Normally, when we respond to a storm like that, we have to go in with mass feeding first, and then we have to do all other kinds of things, getting trees off houses, mucking and gutting them out from flooding, providing chaplains and assessors and logistics and 20 different kinds of ministries that we have that we'll talk about in just a minute. But the mass feeding usually ends when the power comes back on. Well, in this case, the mass feeding did not stop when the power started coming back on, because it took longer for the water to come back on. And it took longer for the infrastructure of these towns. And so even though your electricity may have been back on at your house, you couldn't buy groceries at the grocery store to fill your refrigerator and freezers back up, because the grocery stores were damaged. You know, there's still an Ingalls in Swannanoa and in Spruce Pine that has not opened back up, still to this day. And so they have to drive to other towns to get their groceries. There are some places in North Carolina that look like in western North Carolina now, there's some places that look like the storm never touched it. And then there's still some places that look like the storm hit yesterday. And for the next 10 years, there'll be places that look like that. You know, when we went into Hurricane Helene, we had no idea the scope of the damage even when we had started hearing about it. We had no idea. We had volunteers that lived in Spruce Pine that we didn't know if they were okay for 2 weeks. Nobody could get to their house. It was so, the trees were so covered going to their house. We had a volunteer couple who lived in Black Mountain, and they lived on a creek in Black Mountain, And they're some of our main assessors. And so they heard the storm coming, and they heard, you know, they tell you that it sounds like a train, a loud train when a tornado's coming. But in this case, when they heard the loud train, they also heard what sounded like bowling balls being thrown on a bowling lane. You know how sometimes when you drop the ball and it makes that? And when the homeowner went outside his house, he realized that it was the water coming through the creek that was bringing these big boulders down, and they were dropping and hitting other rocks and making that noise. And so he says to his wife, I'm going to hop on it's a side-by-side kind of souped-up golf cart side-by-side. He said, I'm going to go up the river and I'm going to see what's happening. Why don't you go ahead and get into the motorhome? Their motorhome was parked up above their house. And so she grabs a few things and she gets to the motorhome. And he rides up on his side-by-side, and he realizes that the water is coming down faster than he was anticipating. And so he turns around and he comes back down their drive to their house, and he just barely gets off of that side-by-side and up toward the motorhome before the water takes out the side-by-side and slams into the side of their house and knocks it off the foundation. And they get into their motorhome, and this is what they said. If we can get out, we know there's a lot of damage somewhere, so we'll just go live in our motorhome and we'll assess people's homes. We won't worry about our home. You know, sometimes when we say that we're going to serve the Lord, sometimes it means that we sacrifice those things that we think are important to us to make sure someone else can experience the love and the mercy of the Lord. And that's what being a Christian is all about. My grandmother, I bring her up when I speak in churches probably, almost every time. Because I can remember, and I probably said this when I was here 2 years ago, I can remember sitting at her house and her tattered Bible being beside her. And every time there was a commercial on TV or while she was cooking lunch, she cooked lunch and dinner every day. Probably breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. And so when things were cooking, she was reading her Bible. And when commercials were on TV, she was reading her Bible. And when she was getting ready for bed, she was reading the Bible. And I can remember her saying to me one time, just as clear today as it was 50-something years ago, you know, when you become a Christian, that means you got to do something. Don't just sit in church and listen, but get out of the church and do something. I can still remember that. And so, when we are called, when we become a Christian, that means we have a call in our life. You know, we treat calling like I'm called into the ministry or I'm called to be a missionary. But I'm here to tell you that when you say, I am a Christian, you are called to serve Christ. All of us are ministers. All of us are missionaries. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. So when the storms hit or the fires come, we do something about it. I can't think of a greater mandate for disaster response than that passage in Isaiah right there. People are hurting. And more storms are coming. We have political storms. We have personal storms. We have cultural storms. We have natural disasters. We have all kinds of storms that we see every day. And it seems like today, more than any other time in our lifetime or before, the storms are coming faster and faster and faster and faster. I'm sorry, somebody's trying to call me on my cell phone. Faster and faster and faster, those storms are coming. I mean, used to, North Carolina Baptists would respond 5 or 6 times a year. This year, or last year in 2025, was a low year for us, and we responded 9. That was a low year. Most years it's 10 to 12. And what did I say 2024 was? 16. 16. Now, they're not all in North Carolina. We go to Maui. We go to Cuba. We go to Poland. Wherever there's a storm, wherever there's a disaster, we watch and we wait and we listen to how the Lord wants us to be involved. And if it's outside of North Carolina, if someone gives me a call and says, hey, can you come to Jamaica? Then I'm going to talk to my boss, and I'm most likely going to send volunteers to Jamaica. And yesterday, we sent 18 people, flew into Jamaica yesterday. And after church today, they will start working on the first roof that this team will do. And they'll finish 3 roofs this week. And probably build 6 or 7 tiny, they're sheds, but they call them tiny houses in Jamaica. They're supposed to be temporary, but I guarantee you if we go back in 10 years, 90% of those families living in that 8 by 12 shed will probably still be living there. I was in Jamaica last Sunday and looking over things, and it was raining, and the sun was coming up, and it was raining, and then the clouds were breaking, and so there was this rainbow. If you want to see it after this, I'll be glad to show you. I saw both ends of the rainbow in the ocean, and if I could have swam out there, I would have looked for a pot of gold. But it reminded me that even in the midst of one of the greatest, the greatest storm ever to hit that country, the greatest storm ever to hit North Carolina, the worst fire ever to hit the island of Maui, and I know you're thinking about the fires in California and the flooding in Kentucky and the refugees from the Ukraine-Russian war and all of that. In the greatest storms, the Lord's promises never, ever dim.
Right.
Never. Through the waters, I will be with you. You're probably wondering, what can I do to get involved in that kind of ministry? Well, I can't think of a better way to share the gospel. And, I know there's a lot of good ways to share the gospel, but, I'm the disaster relief director, so I can say that, right? We have 20 different disaster relief and recovery ministries. We call it the umbrella's disaster response. But when you hear disaster recovery, that's helping people recover. So that's tearing out their homes from a flood, getting them ready to rebuild. That's working on the tool trailer, giving volunteers the tools that they need, the rakes, the shovels, the chainsaws, the shockwave to spray, all the different power washers, the all the buckets, you name it, it's on that tool trailer. Or disaster recovery means our warehouse that's in Greensboro that houses a lot of our supplies and materials, and how do we get that on trucks and move it to different places. Or the assessors that assess those jobs, or the admin people that work with the job part. That's disaster recovery. And then you got disaster relief. That's the mass feeding and the support things for recovery. So feeding, admin, safety, maintenance, security, logistics, regular general admin, chaplaincy, I can't name them all without looking at the list, because I forget one. But there's 20 different ways. What we like to say to people is, if you have a gift or a talent, and everybody does, then there's something in disaster relief that would match that gift and talent. You drive big road tractors, we pull equipment and water tankers with those. You like to deliver goods on smaller vehicles, we have 2,500 and 3,500 pickup trucks that will pull equipment and bring stuff to a site. We put 150,000 miles on our vehicles just in 2.5 months for Helene. Between Greensboro and Shelby, where some of our equipment is parked, and Rose Hill, where some of our equipment is parked, in the Northeast, all coming west. 150,000 miles on our vehicles, just for Helene. You like to tinker with lawnmowers and small engine repair, and you're good at it? We maintain generators, hot water heaters, convection ovens, tilt skillets. You're a safety officer at your work. We have a volunteer on every one of our sites that's looking for ways that are unsafe. Oh, that extension cord has become frayed. Okay, we've got to replace that. Oh, that water line is not covered. It's a tripping hazard. Let's get it covered. Oh, there's a bolt that's coming out the side of the step, the aluminum steps going up in the shower unit. Okay, let me get maintenance to fix that, or I'll fix it myself. We have security officers that are on site to protect our people and our assets. No, they're not toting guns. I'm not saying that's wrong. It's just to be aware and work with local law enforcement and fire to keep our site safe and secure. We have logistics volunteers that all they do is make sure that when we open up the site, that when that equipment's coming in, we know where to put it. We know where the sewer cleanouts are. We know where the water source is. We know where the electrical sources are. We know if we need to bring in a generator. We know how many parking spaces we need for volunteers and what parking spaces we can park equipment. You have a gift or a talent. We have a way for you to be involved in disaster response, whether it's through the recovery side or the relief side. And this is interesting, to me, it's interesting. North Carolina Baptist Disaster Relief, I'm not being boastful, I promise, but we have the most volunteers in North Carolina of any Baptist disaster relief organization across the state, across the country. We have 8,000 trained volunteers. You have to train thousands and thousands of volunteers because most of them can pick up tomorrow and go, so that means they most likely are retired, or they're independently wealthy, or they're self-employed and they can pick up a little bit better than others. And so all of our volunteers, we just can't have 100% participation. We usually have about 70% participation in a disaster. In Helene, we had 13,000 some odd volunteers in the 2.5 months that we were doing recovery and relief. And so we had lots of people from all over we had people from every state, Canada, Virgin Islands, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Kenya, and the Bahamas that we know of. Every U.S. state and all of those countries and territories. We had volunteers that worked with us. That doesn't count all the other organizations that were there. But we also, North Carolina Baptist, also moved from response to rebuild. Very few Baptist disaster relief move into rebuild. And if they say they do rebuild, they're rebuilding 2 houses, 3 houses, 6 houses. Just after Hurricane Florence alone, North Carolina Baptist volunteers rebuilt over 1,800 homes. And they built about 180 brand new homes. And during Helene, what's it been, 18 months? 14 months, something like that. 14 months since Helene hit. 15 months, something like that. We have finished 655 homes, getting people back in their homes. That's 655 families that are back in their homes so far. Now, Florence, we're still working, and we've been there 8 years. So we think we've done pretty good to get 655 families back in their home since September of 2024. We've started 13 new builds. Our goal is about 150 new builds, and I don't even know what our goal would be on rebuilds. We still get rebuild requests these months later after the storm. People waiting on the insurance, or people thought that they could take care of that rebuild themselves, and then they realized that they needed help. And how much does it cost the homeowner to rebuild their home? The only thing we ask for them to do is if they received any insurance money for that damage, which most of them didn't because, flood insurance you don't typically have up in the mountains. So most of them didn't have insurance. And let me digress a minute. Flood insurance is for water that comes up out of the ground. Wind and storm damage is usually covered under homeowners, our regular old homeowners. This particular flood didn't come up out of the ground. It came rushing down a mountain. But because it was called a flash flood, it did not fall under homeowners. So that's a loophole that needs to be closed. Because that flood water, when it's eastern North Carolina and the flood comes up, Floyd, that 30 feet of water took weeks and weeks and weeks to go down. In western North Carolina, as soon as the water slammed into something, within an hour it was gone. To me, that should be covered under homeowners, but I know I'm not here to talk about our insurance issues. But that should be covered under homeowners, but it's not. Anyway. So, if any insurance, if any grants from the local government, the state government, FEMA, and all of those kinds of things, if there's any grant money, if you have a little bit of savings, we're not going to take all of somebody's money, but the homeowner, if they can contribute anything toward that rebuild, we ask them to contribute toward that. And then everything else comes from donations that churches have made. We've received money from the state of North Carolina. We've received money from the State Employees Credit Union. If you're a State Employees Credit Union member, and I think it's $1 a month that comes out of your bank account, I think, is that right? $1 a month for those of you who are, that goes toward their foundation. Well, they gave us $5 million this year. So if you're a State Employees Credit Union member, then that dollar that you put in, a lot of that over the years has now come back to North Carolina to help us, North Carolina Baptist, rebuild. And so all that money together, so we've received about $24 million. But $20,000 is the average rebuild cost. So anybody want to do the math on what $20,000 times, let's say 1,000. Is that 20 million? I believe so. So you're already at $20 million. And then you throw in all those rebuilds. We think we need about $50 million to do what we feel like the Lord has called us to do over the next few years. Anybody want to write that check today? We'll take it. But it's not about the money. We talk about money a lot because we can't do what we do without money. But I'm here to tell you that Baptist on Mission disaster response volunteers, by and large, it's all about the gospel. So let me leave you with this. It's about the gospel. When you come through the waters, then you help people who go through the storms. There's training events for you to be involved in. You just go to our website, baptistonmission.org, and you can see the disaster relief trainings coming up. The closest one to here is in Mooresville in April, not very far from here. They're all over the state. You don't have to pick the one from Mooresville. That's just the closest one to you. You can come to any of them. Look at those things. See how you can be involved. And get involved in helping people when sometimes they are experiencing the greatest storm they've ever experienced in their life. Let's pray together. Lord, we are so grateful for the love that you have for us and for the ways that we can serve you and be a part of bringing people into your kingdom. We know that you don't need us, Lord, but we are so grateful that you allow us to be a part of showing people what it means to know you and to love you. So help us care for people when they're going through their storms, whatever those storms may be. And as they come, Lord, help us to be aware that people are going to be hurting, and how can we be a part of helping them heal and find joy. Thank you for this church, for their commitment to you, for their giving to missions, for their participating in ways to share the gospel. I'm so thankful for this church and the ministry that it does right here in this community and around the world. Thank you, Lord, for this day. And I ask all these things in your name.